that's why they took her to the hospital, and Ron said it was clean through, a break they could see. But they thought they could still do rehab through, other means to try to get still some mobility in her leg back.
Yeah, my mom was, she was in the hospital for cancer. And they were getting ready to release her. She got up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom by herself instead of calling them.
Yeah.
So, she took a fall and had a brain bleed.
Anybody need a copy of our outline this morning, The Nature of Man? You do? Well, we'll get a start. Okay. Anybody else? We'll get a start on this section of study here this morning. Next week, as you know, is our gospel meeting, and we are asked to be in the auditorium for a lesson that Brother Hudgens will be bringing then. And then we have plans of being on vacation for 2 weeks after that. Zane, he was going to fill in while I was gone. He did, all right. He had an excellent study at Wednesday night when he filled in for Dale, so I'm sure they did, but I didn't know what he taught on, but I'm grateful for him to fill in. And he believes he can fill in the week after the gospel meeting, but maybe not the week after that, because they're getting ready to make their move down to Texas. So that whatever week that ends up, Sunday that ends up, third or fourth Sunday, maybe in the auditorium class out there, but we'll work that out. So like I said, we're just going to kind of get a start on our study here this morning. Hang on to your outlines, and we'll review whenever we get back into our study at the end of next month, and go from there. I do appreciate Zane filling in while we were away last weekend. We're going to be talking about the nature of man here to begin with, and make mention how important this is to our study at this particular juncture in our studies of life after death, the end of time. In studying the end of time, and as I mentioned, the end of time for us personally is death. Then we need to know what the Bible teaches regarding the nature of man. In other words, does man have a spirit? Does man have a soul which continues to exist after the body dies? In our view of man's nature, that is, whether or not man is body and spirit, body and soul, will have a bearing upon our views concerning what happens when man dies. So I want us to look at this particular subject now before we go on into other studies that does reveal from God's Word what takes place with us, our soul and spirit, if we have one. And of course, I believe everybody in here believes that we do, soul and spirit, after it departs from the body. Our life is over here. We're going to look at Ecclesiastes 12, verse 6 and 7 here after our prayer. Let's go to Heavenly Father, word of prayer. Holy Father in heaven, we're thankful to you for this Lord's Day, and we're thankful, Father, for your written word and the guidance it provides for our life. Thankful for the revelation that it gives to us of your will, your nature, and your desires for our life, and thankful for the revelation it gives to us of the sacrifice that Jesus, your Son, our Savior, made for us on the cross, that we might be able to maintain a relationship with you. We might have forgiveness of our sins so that we could stand justified in your sight. We're thankful, Father, for all the saints who make up this local congregation, and the time we have to spend with one another and encouraging one another in our studies of your word, and pray you'd be with us as we strive to make application of your word to our daily lives. We're mindful, Father, of those who are numbered and gone because of sickness, health reasons, and pray you'd be with them and the caregivers working in their case, that the things being done for them might restore them to their much wanted health. We ask, Father, that you'd continue to be with us, not only in our studies this hour and our time of worship before you in the next hour, but in our daily activities of life as we strive to serve you in all that we say and all that we do. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Ecclesiastes chapter 12, verse 6 and 7. Let's see, Donna, you want to begin our reading here this morning, Ecclesiastes 12, 6 and 7?
Remember your Creator before the silver cord is loosed, or the golden bowl is broken, or the pitcher shattered at the fountain, or the wheel broken at the well. Then the dust will return to the earth as it was, and the spirit will return to God who gave it.
Been a couple, 3 years when we studied the book of Ecclesiastes, wisdom literature, but you may recall the previous verses seem to be kind of a figurative description of the symptoms, the infirmities of old age. Well, now in verse 6, we appear to have kind of the, in a figurative sense, immediate symptoms of death. Remember your Creator before the silver cord is loose. Some think that has reference to the spinal cord giving out, or the golden bowl is broken, and some think that has reference to our skull or brain deteriorating and immediately gone at death, or the pitcher shattered at the fountain, and some think that has reference to the heart, or the wheel broken at the wheel of life broken at the well. Then the dust will return to the earth as it was, and the spirit will return to God who gave it. That's one of several passages that teaches that there is life after death. The dust returned to the earth, it has reference to the body. The body is made out of dust, as other passages in the Old Testament very clearly indicate. It's going to return back to the dust of the earth. But then there's a spirit that's mentioned here that will return to God who gave it. So this is one of several passages that reveal to us this dual nature of man, body and spirit, body and soul, as we'll look at in our studies. Materialism, you may not be aware of the term, is the view that man is a body without the inner man of the spirit. This theory is held by atheists and evolutionists. They don't believe in life after death. They believe that the body basically is all there is, and then once our body is dead, then that's the end of our existence. But there are religious groups that also hold to the materialistic line of thinking. Seventh-day Adventists, Jehovah's Witness, maybe the most noted ones that would come into mind, but there's also the worldwide or Seventh-day Church of God out there, and there's a few others out there that fall in the category of materialist. And people who believe that man's nature is wholly material, just flesh and blood only, have completely different views than those who hold that man possesses a spirit or soul which survives death. So that's why we're looking at this study now before we go on to Bible passages that do give us some revelation of what takes place with this soul or spirit that survives death. And we're going to begin by looking at the term that is translated soul in many places. Look at it as it's used in the Bible. The controversy in the religious world regarding whether or not man lives beyond the death revolves around the use of the words soul and spirit. And many try to make it sound simpler than it is by suggesting that there's one definition for each word which applies every time that word's found. And if you've had any conversation with Jehovah's Witness, you know that they're notorious for doing this. They'll go through especially Old Testament passages, and they'll show you where the term soul is used with respect to animals and man. They say, see, animals have a soul, man has a soul. Animals, they once they die, then that's the end of their existence, and the same thing with respect to man. But the problem is that one word often has different meanings. It all depends upon the context of those words. Varied usages of a single word are quite common in all languages. It's true in the English language, and it's true also in Hebrew and Greek. Hebrew being the Old Testament words, and then Greek being the New Testament words. And the words translated soul and spirit have many different meanings in the Old New Testament. And to begin with, we're going to be, the Hebrew word, first of all, and I don't know the exact pronunciation of these Hebrew transliterations or Greek transliterations, but it looks like nephesh. It's translated soul over 400 times in the Old Testament. But we're going to note that sometimes it does not refer to man's inner being. And this is the problem, especially, again, Jehovah's Witnesses is notorious for this. They'll show you where this term, nephesh, is translated something else besides soul and try to make that definition fit with respect to everything that's said about man. And to begin with, I'm just going to cite these few passages myself here because they're not crucial to our studies and actual learning of the true definition of soul and showing that it does relate to our inner being, this nature of man that lives on after death, but just show you that the terms are used in different ways. But then we'll show you where the terms do indeed make reference to a soul as distinguished from the body, make reference to the inner being of man. So it's just basically instructive that we want to look at the fact that sometimes this term is used in reference to things that do not refer to man's inner being. Donna, did you have a question or comment? I thought you had your hand up. All right, sounds fine. Then anybody else maybe have a question or comment on what we're going to be doing here. But the Hebrew word nephesh occurs several hundred times in the Old Testament, and it's a general term. It does mean several things according to the context. It's translated soul in most translations over 400 times. It's translated life over 120 times in the Old Testament. But many times it refers simply to the life of the individual, whether that individual in the context is a man or an animal. Many times it just refers in that way. But the point is there are uses of the word where it does not refer to man's inner being. Just as some examples here, and I don't think we have a need to cover every example, so I'm just giving you some examples of this. This Hebrew term, nephesh, that is translated soul in many other passages, sometimes refers to just animal life. Genesis in chapter 1 and verse 20 and verse 21, God said, "Let the waters abound with an abundance of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the face of the firmament of the heavens." So God created great sea creatures and every living thing that moves, with which the waters abounded according to their kind, and every winged bird according to its kind, and God saw that it was good. The term living in verse 20 and the term living in verse 21 comes with this Hebrew word nephesh. Now that Hebrew word nephesh, we're going to see in a moment, is translated soul in many other passages, but this is one where Jehovah's Witness, materialists would go to and say, see, there's the term soul that you say is a entity that lives on beyond death. Well, animals have that same thing too then. So you're mistaken in thinking that soul refers to something that lives on after death, because you don't believe that animals live on after the death of their body. But just pointing out that this is one place where the term nephesh is just translated living. In Numbers in chapter 31 and verse 19, the term nephesh is translated person. In Numbers 31 and verse 19, the passage states, "As for you, remain outside the camp 7 days. Whoever has killed any person, and whoever has touched any slain, purify yourselves and your captives on the 3rd day and on the 7th day." The term person there comes from this word, nephesh, that is translated soul in, like I say, many other contexts. Back in Numbers 6 and verse 6, this term nephesh is simply translated body. In Numbers in chapter 6 and verse 6, talking about the Nazarite, all the days that he separates himself from the Lord, he shall not go near a dead body. Again, nephesh is the term, Hebrew term that is used and translated body here in this place. There's a couple of places where this term, and we'll see this especially with respect to spirit, but there's a couple of places where this term nephesh is translated breath. In Job chapter 41 and verse 21, here there's a reference to this great sea beast, Leviathan, the creation of God, and it talks about his breath in Job chapter 41, verse 21. Well, the term comes from this term nephesh, this Hebrew term nephesh. So, point is, while the Hebrew term translated in many of the places soul is used in these various ways, we need to note different places where nephesh is also used for the soul of man, distinguished from the body, the soul of man referring to the inner being of man. You just need to know, especially if you're talking with materialists, especially Jehovah's Witness, that yes, indeed, the term that's translated soul is used in other ways than the way we're going to look at here next, where it is indeed referring to the soul of man, this inner being of man. Questions or comments on what we said here on these passages up to this point? Nephesh is used for the soul of man distinguished from the body. See, in these other usages, there wasn't any distinguishing of this nephesh from the body, of whether it's an animal or a person or any other being as far as that goes. But here we're going to see where the term soul is used in a way that is distinguished from the body. Now we'll begin reading some of these passages. Isaiah in chapter 10 and verse 18 is the first one that we'll look at. Cal, you want to read that for us? Isaiah 10 verse 18.
And he will destroy the glory of his forest and of his fruitful garden, both soul and body. And it will be as when a sick man wakes away.
In the context, God is going to bring a burning judgment against Assyria and against the king of Assyria. That's the context or setting of this. But it's just here a statement. This burning judgment that God's going to bring against this nation is going to consume the glory of his forest and of his fruitful field, both soul and body. There the term, Hebrew term nephesh, translated soul, and you have soul distinguished from the body. It's a separate entity from the body that is referred to here. Job chapter 14 and verse 22 is another passage. And again, for purpose of studies, I don't think we need to look at every instance. Like I say, the term is translated some 400 times soul in the Old Testament. We're just giving you some representative passages here to see how the term is used. Carrie, oh yes, Gene.
Yeah, in that term where it says soul and body,
Mm-hmm.
is there a different term used for body in that translation?
You know, I didn't even look at that. I would suspicion that there are different Hebrew and also different Greek words translated body. Now, I don't look at that though and see if there is a difference. It's common that many words are used in different ways as far as that goes, so it is possible. Now, the term soul, as it's used in the New Testament, the Greek term is translated soul. I mean, sometimes it just refers to the body itself or to life itself. So there may well be a different term that is reference to the body. I'll have to look that up. Good question. Karen, you want to read this next passage here, Job 14, verse 22?
But his flesh upon him shall have pain, and his soul within him shall mourn.
In the context here, Job, he's wondering about things. Of course, he's suffering at this time, and there's times when he even thinks that it'd be best if life was over for him, the nature of suffering. And you go back in Job chapter 14 and verse 10, he says, a man dies and is laid away. Indeed, he breathes his last. And where is he? He's wondering about this. Where is man after death? In verse 14, if a man dies, shall he live again? He's wondering about that. He's surmising about that. And that's what he's doing here in verse 22. In the context, he's talking about at death, man experienced separation from his family, from his friends, and he said his flesh is going to be in pain. His flesh upon him, the King James Version says, will be in pain over this, and his soul will mourn over it. His soul within, King James Version says, will mourn over it, this separation of family and friends that he talks about in the context. But again, the point is, we see his flesh that is upon him is distinguished from this soul that is within him, that is mourning over this separation experienced at death. Psalm 63 and verse 1, if you would, Pat.
Hear my cry, O God, attend to my prayer. That's it. Oh, I read the one. No, I read the right one, but it didn't say anything.
Psalm 63 and verse 1?
Oh, I read 61.
Okay,
Sorry.
all right.
I thought, well, that didn't make any sense. Okay. Oh God, you are my God. Early will I seek you. My soul thirsts for you. My flesh longs for you in a dry and thirsty land where there is no water.
There's a lot of places where the term soul occurs, and the reference is to man's inner being, but what we're mainly focusing on is passages that clearly show that there's a distinction between the soul and the flesh, the soul and the body, and this is just one of those several passages here. Also look at 1 Kings chapter 17 and verse 21. This is a time whenever the widow of Zarephath's son had passed away, had died, and Elijah, the man of God, he is going to bring this child back to life. And we see what he does here in 1 Kings chapter 17, verse 21, if you would, Jack.
Then he stretched himself upon the child 3 times and called to the Lord and said, O Lord my God, I pray you, let this child's life return to him.
Okay, this child's life returns to him. He stretches him, Elijah stretches himself out over this body that is dead at the present time, because the child has died according to the context, and then he prays, let this child's soul come back to him. King James says, let this child's soul come back into him, is the terminology that's used here. And here we see this soul was existing in a separate state from the body until the soul came back to the body of this child. And now then you've got both soul and body together, and the child is alive. Question or comments on usages we see here at the present time? Yes, Cal.
Just a random thought hit me. We never see anything in the Bible about the soul that comes back to life, whether he wanted to come back.
Yeah.
So I just kind of wondered about that.
I'm concerned about that.
Yeah, we never.
Yeah.
It doesn't talk about any after-death experiences or anything like that. The soul just comes back, right? But we never find out from them, did they really want to come back?
Yeah. Let's see what you're saying on things. Yeah. Right. Reasons that we're not told why that some did, as far as that goes. Of course, they had to die again.
Mm-hmm.
They had to die again, just like those that were raised on the day of Jesus' death on the cross. The graves were opened, and the bodies of saints came forth from the graves. Well, those bodies were dead, but their souls, their spirits had come back at the time being. We're not told how long or for what reason or what took place on things. That's it. Donna, do you have a question or comment?
Would they remember what heaven looked like. Like you see movies how someone, and they come back and say, well, let me tell you what heaven was like. you
Yeah,
know.
yeah.
I mean, do they really, would they remember? That would make them sad, I would think. They
Well,
were in heaven, all of a sudden, here, I was there. Why'd you bring me back?
Yeah, that's right. And I think I may have mentioned before, some of these accounts that you have, and some people that write books about, they believe that they died and went to heaven and came back. The evidence has indicated that they didn't really experience that. And it's one of those subjective things. How can you tell? How can you tell? Just have their word on things on it. I mean, it's possible, but that is the main problem against it, is if they were in that heavenly realm, why did they come back to be subjected to all the turmoil of the earth and the chances of not going to heaven again, things of that nature. But
Well, it brought glory to God, them coming back.
Right.
That's what that's
that's
all.
right. Yeah, that's right. Yes, Jack.
Well, I'm a little bit confused, and I don't mind saying so, that when Jesus comes, we all get judged then and go to heaven or hell. How can someone die, if that's true, how can someone die for a few minutes and see heaven?
Yeah, well, that's it on things. The accounts that are written about or told about on things, there's so many inconsistencies that makes it unbelievable, I guess, is the word to say on things. That's it. And we'll see more, I think, as some answers to these questions about life after death as we go on in our studies too, down the road. I also want to point out that this term, the Hebrew term nephesh, is used of man's inner being. You know, what we looked at before is just how it's used, the soul distinguished from the body. But there's a whole host of other passages where it is rather clear that the term is used referring to the inner being of man. Genesis in chapter 42 and verse 21 is one of those places. Let's see, John, you want to read that for us?
They said one to another, we are verily guilty concerning our brother, that we saw the anguish of his soul when he besought us, and we would not hear. Therefore is this distress come upon us.
And you may see the context. If you look at this passage before, this is what Joseph's brothers are saying whenever Joseph said, you go back to your father, but you leave Jacob here. And they're seeing this as punishment for the crime that they committed. They were guilty concerning their brother before, and they admit they saw the anguish of his soul, his inner being, not just the disturbance of his body. Of course, they afflicted his body too, but they saw the anguish of his inner being whenever they did this harm to him in the past. In Leviticus in chapter 26 and verse 43, we see this statement that the soul abhors the statutes of God in their disobedience. That is, not saying that we should abhor them, but that's what happens in their disobedience. Janice, you want to read that for us? Leviticus 26 and verse 43.
The land also shall be left of them, and shall enjoy her Sabbaths, while she lieth desolate without them, and they shall accept of the punishment of their iniquity, because even when they despise my judgments, and because their soul abhorred my statutes.
God is giving warnings against disobedience, and there's going to be a time whenever they are afflicted enough because of disobedience that they will accept their guilt. And this guilt is because they despise God's judgments, and because their soul, their inner being, even their inner being, they abhorred the statutes, the laws of God himself. In Numbers chapter 21 and verse 5, we see the term soul. Again, the Hebrew term is nephesh, and is translated soul. It appears to refer to this inner being again. Dear, you want to read Numbers 21 and verse 5?
The people spoke against God and Moses. Why have you brought us out of Egypt to die in the wilderness, where there is no food and no water, and we loathe this miserable food?
And so their very inner being loathes this worthless bread, as they determine on this occasion. And then 1 Samuel chapter 30 and verse 6, has a reference to the soul being grieved. If you want to read that for us, Mindy.
David was greatly distressed because the men were talking of stoning him. Each one was bitter in spirit because of his sons and daughters. But David found strength in the Lord his God.
All right. The soul was grieved here in 1 Samuel 30 and verse 6. And you have it on your outline, and you have it up here, 1 Kings. So if you didn't find it, the reason you didn't is because it's supposed to be 2 Kings. So if you will, and Isaac read 1 Kings, I'm sure, but if you will, turn to 2 Kings chapter 27. And what's happening here is a Shunammite woman's son has died, and she brings him to the man of God, Elisha, in this case, and it describes her during the course of the death of her son. 2 Kings 4 and verse 27, if you would, Isaac.
Now when she came to the man of God at the hill, she caught him by his feet, but Isaiah gave near to push her away, but the man of God said, let her alone, for her soul is in deep distress, and the Lord has hidden it from me.
Yeah, I think King James Version says vexed within her, but soul in deep distress, and so it's not talking about anything other than her inner being here. It went haywire, didn't it?
Yeah.
Scheduled maintenance and everything else. I don't know what to do about that.
I don't either.
Okay, all right. Well, I wonder if that's what, if anybody's tuned in and seeing. Let's see, I can cancel it. It's just telling you. Let's see if that'll work.
Just a little red.
Yeah, push that little red one up there, maybe. And there's the red one there. And then we'll try there. Are you sure you want to exit? Well, I think so.
Are you sure?
Okay. There we go. We cleared it. May not have been the thing to do, but. Well, I do maintenance, but I do not do maintenance on computers on things. Not my forte. Job chapter 10 and verse 1. Job again in his distress here, talking about his soul being weary of life and the bitterness of his soul during this deep distress that he's going through. I'll go ahead and take time to read it. Job chapter 10 and verse 1. Job says, my soul loathes my life. Here's one of these instances where Jehovah's Witnesses will tell you that soul just refers to the life of an individual. You remember Genesis chapter 1, verse 20 and 21? See, God, He created these animals as living creatures. So it's just the life of the individual. Animals have life and man has life. Well, here, soul is used in a sense that is distinguished from his life. My soul loathes my life. I will give free course to my complaint. I will speak in the bitterness of my soul about the condition that he's going through at this time. Questions or comments on how the term soul is used in the Bible? And when I say soul, keep in mind the Hebrew term is nephesh, and so it's not always translated soul. It is translated soul some 400 times, and I'm not saying that every 400 times it's referring to man's inner being, but many times out of that 400 it is referring to man's inner being as distinguished from the body. Gene and then Cal.
Yeah, the verse, and you may cover it yet, but the verse that says, the soul that sinneth, it shall die.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
You got-
Ezekiel 18:20. The soul that sins shall die.
So there's action and life in the soul.
That's right. That's
that
right.
can do good or ill.
That is one of the places where it appears to be referring to individuals' inner being on things. Certainly our bodies are involved in sinning also, but there does get to the heart of the matter, I guess you might say, the soul that sins shall die. Cal, question or comment?
Well, New American Standard says, I loathe my own life. But I think you have to, when you're doing this type of study, you have to kind of look at a
Okay.
interlinear where you see the
Well,
actual
you actually see
literary
it on that,
words.
okay.
And it's been translated for us to read in our common language, but my soul loathes my own life. It's very clear what's said there,
That's
but
right.
you kind of have to look at the interlinear to find those.
Well, that's one of these things, if you're talking with Jehovah's Witness, which you've probably had occasion to, and maybe others have too on things, how do you show them, except if you have an interlinear or something like that, and show them that, yes, the term does come from Nephish, but it's like terms in English language, they're used in different ways in different contexts on things, and then show them, well, the same term, though, is really translated soul in these passages in something distinguished from the body, whereas they aren't in other places, and dealing with the inner being of the individual. And this is where, how should I say it, they have an upper hand with people that aren't aware of these different usages. Because they go to somebody that doesn't have much Bible knowledge at all, and show in Genesis chapter 1, verse 21 and 20 and 21 that the term that's translated so other places is just used with reference to living animals, and so whenever an animal dies, that's the end of their existence. Therefore, that must be the way that it's used with respect to man. The same term. So it's easier for them to be involved, it seems to me, in this deception of people because of the way that you try to make it simpler than it is in the way things are used in the Old Testament especially. And they do the same thing New Testament we'll get to here. More questions or comments on what we looked at, Don, and then Cal again?
They're well indoctrinated in what they do, but their general Bible knowledge and everything else is very poor. It's the same thing with Mormons. They're well indoctrinated in what they teach, but when you get them and start exposing them to what the scriptures say, they used to come by the house regularly, right?
Yeah.
And I get a study going, and next thing I know, he'd be gone, here'd be somebody new, you know?
Yeah. That's
and
right.
finally they quit coming.
Right. Well, this is why, and I think I've said this before to folks in the class here, I will not study with them on their hobbies,
No.
like life after death and soul and things of that nature, because they are just extremely indoctrinated. Not that I can't, but I'm going to get them off topic. I want to study with them about the deity of Jesus Christ. They do not believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. And as far as I'm concerned, if an individual will not confess that Jesus is the Son of God, you're wasting your time on every other Bible subject.
Sure.
And that does get them off topic because they're not near as well versed about the Watchtower Bible Tracts Society's teaching on Jesus just being a man. They're not as well versed on that. And I've been able to have some studies with them to the point, though, like you said, you don't see them again. Somebody else is sent out, if they send out anybody again on things. Yes, Gene.
The significance of that question goes back to Philip and the eunuch. When he said,
right.
if you believe today, he
That's
said,
right.
and he said what he believed.
That's right.
He believed what he needed to believe.
Mhm.
I believe
At that point,
Jesus
yeah.
Christ, the Son of the living God. That's a question which they will not and cannot answer.
Yeah. But most times, Jehovah's Witnesses, they come to the door, they want to talk about their materialistic beliefs and no hell and things of that nature on things. Those are popular subjects that they're well indoctrinated in. And that's what they try to do. Donna, didn't mean to forget about you. You had a question or comment?
The ones who are vegetarians, I know some of it's for health reasons. Is it because sometimes if they think an animal has a soul, so you sure can't eat something that has a soul? Is that why people who are vegetarians don't eat animals, because they think they have a soul?
Well, I imagine there's some that would say that. You'd probably have to go to the vegetarian's website. They've got one out there on it. And I'm trying to think. I went to that years ago because they had billboard signs all over Oklahoma City about 20 years ago saying Jesus was a vegetarian and things of this nature, and they had a website to go to, and don't remember if that's one of them or not, but it could well be one of them.
Well, what I've heard on whenever they have said that about the soul and living being and cells and all that type of stuff. They've even taken it as far as some people will say, like even plants though. I mean, if they look at that, the
Yeah.
cell structure and all that
Yeah.
type of stuff, how can you eat
You'd
plants
starve.
then if you,
Yeah.
I mean, that argument doesn't really
It
stand up.
doesn't-
Most of
that's
the
right.
time, most of the
That's true,
common
too.
ones is
Yeah.
because of the cruelty to animals.
Yeah, right. Well, I know one of the main arguments of them is they think that there's lots of things that exploit animals, and they're against exploiting animals. For example, the website years ago said they wouldn't eat eggs because that exploits chickens. They wouldn't drink milk because that exploits cows. So you see, you're not dealing with a living being in either of those cases on things, but you're exploiting living beings by partaking those type of things on it. Even though eggs are not meat, and even though milk's not meat, they still wouldn't do that because of exploiting animals on it. They go to pretty good extremes on things on it. The Greek word, let's look at that. We look at soul as used in the Bible. The Greek word, and I have no clue exactly how this word is to be pronounced here, but you see it up there. It occurs 105 times in the New Testament, but it's translated soul 58 times in the New Testament. But it again has several uses depending on the context. Some passages it could mean an inner spirit that gives man this dual nature we're talking about, or the same passages could be referring to the life of that individual in fleshly existence. So you have to define it in the context is the point. Again, just looking at some of these instances where it refers to the person or life itself rather than referring to a person's inner being. Acts chapter 21, Acts chapter 2 and verse 41. Acts chapter 2 and verse 41, there were 3,000 souls that had been baptized and added to the saved. It could refer to the inner being of these individuals, but it looks like just talking about these individuals. 3,000 people were baptized and added to the saved at that occasion. Yes?
Well, I take it that means your soul was saved, because you can die, but your soul lives on. I've always heard that.
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
know where it's at in the Bible, but you may die, but your soul lives on.
And you're right. That's what I'm saying. It could mean it is talking about the inner being of the individual, because the body is not really the concern for salvation. Although our body is going to be redeemed, we have terminology with respect to that at the final resurrection and things of that nature, and so it could be used in that sense. But just pointing out that it could also just refer to the person itself. And then,
Well, I think it's inclusive.
I'm sorry?
They baptized, the 3,000 were baptized. The bodies were baptized, okay? They were living spirit, they had living souls, or they had the breath of life in them, and they had a little spirit. I think it's inclusive.
It's very possible.
Talk about all three.
Yeah, and that is another point to make about this. Sometimes the term soul, and this is probably one of them too, where it's used, there's a figure of speech for it. I can't remember the figure of speech, the terminology, but it's the part for the whole. For example, when we refer to the bread and the cup, the container is put for the contents of the container, the fruit of the vine, that type of thing. I guess is what I'm trying to say. But sometimes the term soul is put forth the part for the whole, talking about the whole being of the individual, both body and inner being, soul or spirit, on things. And
Well,
it's
how
possible
many
to use
souls
these
were in
terms.
the boat?
Yeah. Right.
Well, the boat may be carrying 3 people that are alive and may have 16 that are dead.
Yeah. Right.
And they're just transporting it, right?
Right.
But if you're going to be rescued, how many souls are you looking for?
Mm.
3.
That's right. That's
They're
right.
the ones that have everything.
Right. Right.
And that's just a generic term for it.
Well, these examples.
In this case.
Right. Right. And these examples, I'm saying, the kind of a dual usage of it on things. I think some translations would say that rather than souls were added on that day, would say individuals or something or other like that. On the point is that not real clear is referring to the inner being of the individual on things. Can just refer to the persons. 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 20 talking about Noah and his household. There were 8. There were 8 souls saved by water. Well, again, some would see that as just talking about the individuals saved by water, but it could refer to the inner being saved by water. And then this one example, John 13 verse 38, is probably the clearest one. This is where Jesus says to Peter, "Will you lay down your life for my sake?" It's translated life, this term that is translated soul in other places, rather than laying down his inner being, laying down his physical life for him. Was that the second bell already? Okay. Well, I was hoping we'd get down to how it is used, but you can see it very clearly, but we'll cover it whenever we come back to our studies. But I said, though, it'll be about 3-4 weeks before we get back to our studies, so hang on the outlines and take a little more time to look at these terms. Jack, question or
In
comment?
general, it seems to me that when people say, or what do they mean when they say, so-and-so was saved the other day in church? What do you mean? They saved his body or they saved his soul?
Correctly, it'd be the soul, because we're going to look at some passages where well, for some reason, 1 Corinthians 5 and verse 5, when Paul is talking about disciplining this individual, the purpose of it is for the destruction of the flesh, that his spirit may be saved. So we're talking about the inner being is the focus of salvation, whereas the body isn't, and that's a good point. Good point. And there again, as I said, Acts 2 and 41 could be referring to especially the soul, the inner being saved, and 1 Peter 3:20 also on things. Clear to John 13 verse 38 not. All right. Thank you for your attention here this morning, and we'll take up our studies here in a few weeks after this. Next week we'll be in the auditorium, and the next week after Zane's agreed to teach.
Thank you.
Well.
Don't talk about rain.
Well, I don't think it's going to be around much longer. I know.
You know what? It better not rain. I've got 4 bags of concrete in the back of my truck.
Oh.
It's not raining. It's raining. I keep it from raining.
You hope.
Ain't that the folks that say that there's only gonna be 144,000?
Yeah.
I worked with a guy like that, and he said, yeah, it's gonna be 144,000. I said, well, how you get to be one of them? He said, well, you can't, you're either one of them or you're not. I said, then what's the use of you teaching me for? If I'm already one of them, why are you teaching me about it?
I'll give you a good one. If I'm fixing to die, if I'm about to die, just baptize me. That'll save my body.
Yeah, it doesn't work.
It doesn't work.
Yeah, that's right. That's the soul.
You're saving your soul when you're saved. Even though you baptize your body, you're really saving your soul. Because like I say, if I'm about to die, baptize me. If it saves your body.
Well, that goes hand in hand. That first lady preached as in 8 souls saved through water.
It don't
Well,
matter.
I figure baptism
That ain't what we're
saves
talking about,
us.
whether you believe or not. We're assuming that you believe, but if you're about to die, if they're not talking about the soul, then you be baptized to save your body.
Yeah.
Yeah, you live on.
have to take into account